Hi there. I'm going to be providing some context for our input data that we're going to be using for the Forsys tool. So our study area is in Northern California, the Shasta Trinity National Forest, which you can see here. Um, this shapefile right here, it's delineating the entirety of the national forest, and then these smaller polygons, these are the planning areas located within the national forest, and these are based off of watershed boundaries, administrative boundaries such as like wilderness areas and things of that sort. And so for our analysis, we're adapting a tutorial that was put together by the Forsys consortium. And we incorporated some additional kind of real world data that would be used to develop landscape scale land management treatments. And so let's look first at the tutorial data, and then we'll see how we adapted that. So this is the input from the tutorial data. They had broken down the entirety of the forest into these treatment grid cells. And so each one of these represent 50 hectares, and that's considered a treatment stand. Each treatment stand or treatment grid cell has localized conditions that were calculated, and we are using those localized conditions to develop a treatment project. So combining a bunch of these stand cells into one larger project that will address our management priorities at the scale of the entirety of the forest. So let's look at some of the um, attributes of these individual treatment stands. And so this is the attribute table for this layer. And what it's telling us, the size of each grid cell. So there are some smaller ones, and those are because they're chopped off because of forest boundaries and other delineations. We have the name of the entirety of the national forest, Shasta Trinity National Forest. Forest ID is associated with this. So 514 is the Shasta Trinity National Forest. This is the U.S. Forest Service Region 5. And so our actual treatment variables, though, we have TV sum stand. This represents the timber volume sum for the stand, each one of these grid cells. And so we have 0 values here, and that means there's no timber volume in these stands. We can quickly look and see what that means. So we'll pull some imagery as our base layer and zoom to one of these layers. So this one, you can see there isn't a ton of vegetation. You can see some trees, and I should note that this tutorial, it's a couple years old, so our imagery data is actually newer than the timber sum value, because it looks like you could maybe have a tiny bit of harvestable timber, but those are probably really young trees also. So that's just a consideration you have to keep in mind. But then we can also look at areas that have a lot of timber. So let's zoom to right here, this planting area that we have highlighted. And this looks kind of like your standard reprod commercial forest almost. So that makes sense that an area that looks like a very dense forest has a high value there. And so our other main value that we're looking at is this HUIDW per stand. And that is a value representative of the homes under imminent danger of wildfire for each stand. And so let's see what that means. We have some with really high values here. Let's zoom to those. So this one, for example. Oops. That's, well, the wrong one. Okay, so a couple of our highlighted values they're close to the towns of Mount Shasta and Weed, which makes sense. So what this value is trying to tell us is that if a wildfire were to start in one of these treatment stands, the likelihood that it would spread based off of fire effects and damage infrastructure, most likely associated with these towns, is pretty high. And so that's the data that we started with. And then we incorporated additional data from publicly available data sources. So this big layer that we added in, this is from the Landfire database. So this is a national data set put together by the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service. And so specifically what the layer that we're looking at is telling us is the vegetation departure indicates how different current vegetation on the landscape is from estimated past mold conditions. And so, and we have a range of values associated with that. 1 through 100, that's our percent vegetation departure. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Value of 0 is if it's representative of historical conditions, or 100 would be there's a complete departure within that stand from historical vegetation conditions. And then we have these values over 100, which just indicate that we have other things going on, and it most likely won't burn. So water, snow, if there's urban, so infrastructure, stuff of that sort. And so we took this, we clipped it down to just the national forest. It's taking a while because it's like thousands of little polygons for the entirety of the national forest. But the important thing is you can see, what some of these values mean. Let's look at this big red area, and that's value over 100. So that shows us it's actually water. It can't burn, but we have this kind of orangey peach color, and so that's probably a average vegetation departure in these areas, somewhere in the 50-60% range. And then the other data set that we incorporated were critical habitat designations. And so this data was pulled from the bioregional assessment for the Northwest Forest Plan area. And that area is from the Sierra Nevadas up through the North Cascades. And this is the critical habitat designations for any species protected under the Endangered Species Act. And so we can see here that these dark treatment stands are areas that are designated as critical habitat for an ESA species, and then the white ones are areas that aren't designated as critical habitat. And for our planning area, it turned out that the only critical habitat designation were for northern spotted owl. And so we combined all that into our input shapefile, and we can see those values in the attribute table. So, area, we have our critical habitat designations, we have our houses under imminent danger of wildfire values, our mean vegetation departure values, and then our timber volume values as well. And so that's a brief explanation of what the data visually means that we're looking at in our study.